when you're taking modafinil. It's like when the stack becomes inconsistent. So that would be the time to bring in some of the coenzymes, the cofactors. What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ryan, and this, let me adjust my mic, is the Thunder Channel on nootropics, on testosterone, on biohacking, on male performance. Please subscribe to the channel. Look, I know you're going to love our content, so just hit the sub button now, bro. And you know what? I have a 1980s very popular singer that would really appreciate it, bro, if you would hit that like button. Who are we? We are Cortex Labs, and we make a couple really epic products. Number one, the Torque Nootropic Stack. I mean, get that thing if you want 6 to 8 hours of clean energy. You can hire me for consulting for all things related to TRT, nootropics formulation, energy optimization, host of other things. And we have a bunch of nootropics courses and guides, all of which you can get in the description of this video or at livecortex.com. So what I want to do in this video is I want to address how some cholinergics may not be as effective for some people as they should be, or they get side effects from them, or they don't get any effects from them, and the reasons why, and specifically how you can address that by understanding what may need to go into cofactor-wise your administration of cholinergic nootropics, so that these cofactors can not be depleted, so that they can adequately synthesize the target neurotransmitter you're looking for when you're taking said nootropic. So stepping back a bit, like cholinergic nootropics do one of three things. They speed up the usage of acetylcholine, they give you more acetylcholine, or they optimize acetylcholine receptor binding. Now, in order for you to properly deal with the extra synthesis of acetylcholine that, any given nootropic is going to force, like the racetams, they're going to tell your brain to release more choline. Therefore, you're going to have to synthesize more choline, right? You've got to, in that case, take a choline supplement with it. But in addition to that, you should be at the very least getting vitamins B5 and B1 in the picture and taking it with your racetams. There's a paper relative to Alzheimer's that I think is actually pretty interesting relative to B12, which tells us that B12 actually helps you aggregate more acetylcholine receptors. They end up saying at the end, in the conclusion, therefore B12 therapy may represent a promising Alzheimer's disease modifying agent with extra ability over conventional cholinergic modulators to aggregate cholinergic receptors. Now B5, which is pantothenic acid, another very critical chemical to have in the mix if you're not getting adequate responses from cholinergics, Noopept, Hydra-21, Alcar, all of the racetams, any of the choline sources. Pantothenic acid is used in the synthesis of acetylcoenzyme A. Acetylcoenzyme A acts as an acetyl group carrier to form acetyl-CoA and other related compounds. This is a way to transport carbon atoms within the cell. Now, coenzyme A is also important in the biosynthesis of many important compounds such as fatty acids, cholesterol, and acetylcholine. Now, we've talked about this paper before where they gave rats this very particular type of tea and did not allow them to drink water. They just drank tea, which I guess contained water, but also some of the other constituents in the tea, for their water source. And they did that for, 20 weeks. Now, interestingly, if you remove thiamine, okay, so what they did here is administration of tea to rats fed a thiamine half deficient diet for 7 to 8 weeks. So they decreased the thiamine intake by half, caused not only a 60% decrease in acetylcholine synthesis, but also neurological symptoms. This decreased synthesis of acetylcholine is related to a decline in pyruvate dehydrogenase activity. The results suggest that prolonged administration of tea to rats caused an impairment of acetyl-CoA, the enzyme that we just talked about, which B5 helps foster, resulting in a deficit in acetylcholine synthesizing capacity. Look, guys, the cholinergics, it's not just about taking them and then having them execute their action on the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, better signaling, or better optimization of binding to the receptor sites, and thus the activation of those receptors, and then the cholinergic response. It's about doing that, making sure the choline source is right. Like if you're using something like racetams, they're just going to burn up choline, right? They're telling the brain, release more choline, which is going to make you function better acutely. But what happens on the back end? This is why you've got to use alpha-GPC, citicholine, DMAE, other kind of choline building blocks in order to stave off this potential depletion, or at least temporary impaired state of acetylcholine when racetam agents or other cholinergics are forcing them to work better. But at the same time, you need to be conscious of how you're synthesizing these neurotransmitters, right? This actually took me a couple years to figure out because I got into nootropics like everyone else. I started reading like Longevity and all the forums back then, 15 years ago or whatever, that were discussing nootropics, and none of them were advanced enough to understand like coenzymes and cofactors that help you synthesize neurotransmitters. It was just like, all right, take this, it works on this neurotransmitter, optimizes it, you know, you get memory or better brain performance. But I soon figured out, like, why is it that like Noopept would give me like excellent memory and I'd function really well one day, and then the next day like it wouldn't, or 2 weeks later it wouldn't at the same dose. It was very inconsistent. That's when I started thinking about, okay, well, what is it doing optimizing acetylcholine? Well, what is involved in the synthesis of that neurotransmitter? B vitamins. Like, it wasn't until I figured that out and started bringing B vitamins into the picture most times that I dosed any cholinergic nootropic, and especially if I was running into some sort of side effect or it was inconsistent. Now, like, then we have to think about release. Like, how does your brain release these chemicals, right? You know, in the presence of a racetam, it's gonna force the release of acetylcholine kind of anyway. But generally, like, that release also has to be or is somewhat reliant upon other factors, right? And to illustrate a kind of case in point, I'm going to take you to a paper called Possible Involvement of Thiamine in Acetylcholine Release. And this is B1. We know that B1 fosters coenzyme A, which helps you to synthesize, like actually make more acetylcholine from choline, from your choline that you get in your diet from beef or eggs. But in this paper, the results indicate that thiamine and its phosphoric esters are involved either directly or indirectly in the release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. So actually getting it to release and put it into circulation. Now, what does this all mean? Does it mean that you've got to be dosing B1, B5, B12 every time that you dose a cholinergic like Alcar, any of the racetams, Noopept, PRL 853, Idra 21? Not necessarily. However, you should be conscious of the fact that while you're administering these compounds and they're forcing the speed or the release of acetylcholine up, that if you do eventually run into either inconsistency, a lack of effects, or side effects, that you're going to need to consider all the cofactors and coenzymes that go into both the release of acetylcholine, like what makes it possible for it to release at a healthy level, as well as the synthesis of acetylcholine from precursor choline. Now, look, the same can be said for other nootropics that are targeting other neurotransmitter systems, like modafinil. In addition to targeting the orexin system and keeping you awake and giving you that feeling like you've slept for 24 hours straight, and now your brain's like, you know, completely turned on, also blocks dopamine transporters. Look, in this paper, the conclusion is in this pilot study, modafinil blocked dopamine transporters and increased dopamine in the human brain. The transporters are supposed to take the neurotransmitter and then recycle them and store them presynaptically so that they can be released later, right? It kind of keeps check of these neurotransmitter systems so that they don't get depleted. But if you're blocking the transporter, in this case with modafinil, and keeping all this dopamine around, well, you know, the releasable pool and like the ventral tegmental area where a lot of your dopamine originates, what's going to happen there? This is precisely why people, you know, a day later or 2 days later after taking modafinil, or maybe they take modafinil for 4 days straight, and then they sort of start to feel a lack of motivation when they stop taking it, like on day 5 and day 6, they're sort of below baseline, don't really feel optimal. It's probably because you have a temporary inhibition or impairment in the quantity of dopamine in your brain. In these cases, I'm always telling clients and instructing people, giving the suggestion to take mucuna purines after you dose your modafinil, not necessarily on the same day, but if it's the next day when you run into that kind of lack of motivation, take 500 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams mucuna purines. That's going to give you brain usable dopamine, and you're not going to have that side effect. Again, you know, it's not necessarily about a precautionary strategy of taking B vitamins in the case of using all of the cholinergics, or taking mucuna purines when you're taking modafinil. It's like when the stack becomes inconsistent and it isn't affecting you the same, or it's giving you side effects, that would be the time to bring in some of the coenzymes, the cofactors, the precursors to the neurotransmitters that you're burning up when you're using these nootropics, so that you don't end up in a suboptimal state when you cease the usage of them or when you cycle off the next day. All right, as I said at the beginning, yeah, we got a whole bunch of goodies at livecortex.com. Go get the Torque Stack. I mean, this thing is like, hey, if you want 6 to 8 hours of clean stimulant energy, just go buy a bottle. You are going to love the Torque Stack. Pretty much everybody that buys it does, with the exception of the very few non-responders. If you want to learn some of these distinctions and more, yeah, look, we got a bunch of courses as well as downloadable digital guides that are stack written on Nootropics. You can do all that stuff in the description of this video, and all of our stuff is at livecortex.com. And I am always open for consultations. You can go book me on all of my areas of expertise, which you can check out right here or in the description of this video. It takes under a minute to book either an email consult or a call with me at livecortex.com. All right, friends, appreciate you hanging out with me. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you on the next one.
I'm in my element, ooh, yeah. I'm in my element, ooh, yeah. I'm in my element, I'm in my element, ooh, yeah. I'm in my element, ooh, yeah.